This episode is for the mom who has spent years quietly wondering if she was the problem. Too impatient, too reactive, only to one day look at her struggling teen and think, wait, I know this feeling. I've always known this feeling. It's a conversation about what happens when a child's diagnosis or challenge holds up a mirror and what becomes possible when we stop blaming and start understanding. Welcome back to the Comeback Show. I'm Jenn Fast, midlife reinvention coach and mentor, and this is the space where we talk honestly about what it really looks like and feels like to rebuild your life. After burnout, after big changes, and after years of carrying things without the right support. Today's episode is very personal for me because what we're talking about today is something I've lived from the inside, not just as a coach, not just as an observer, but as a mother and as a woman who didn't have language for her own brain until much later than she would have liked. Here's what I mean. I have two daughters. One has been formally diagnosed with ADHD, and the other is showing obvious signs. My husband has ADHD, and I do too. And on top of that, when my oldest daughter was also diagnosed with autism, something cracked open in me, not just about her, but about my whole life, and patterns I had explained away, coping strategies I had mistaken for personality, and struggles I had quietly blamed myself for decades. I have spent years learning about executive function, how it works, what gets in the way, and what actually helps. As a former executive assistant to the C-suite, I spent 10 years maximizing executive function for highly successful people, even if I didn't have the language for it early on. And I've built resources around it that I'll talk about later. So, when I connected with today's guest, I felt that full body recognition immediately. She is doing for teens what I wish someone had done for me and for my kids a long time ago. My guest today is Carla See, an executive function coach for teens and their families, a special education educator with more than 2 decades of experience, and someone whose own story runs right alongside the families she serves. Carla works with teens ages 12 and up, helping them build real-life skills, things like time management, task initiation, planning, follow-through, and emotional regulation. But what makes Carla different is that she's lived this from the inside, as an educator, as a solopreneur, and as a mother. Her own daughter has ADHD with anxiety, and the experience gave her something that no training ever could, a real understanding of how these challenges move through a whole family. Carla, I'm so
Thank
glad
you,
you're
Jen.
here. I always love to start with someone's story because I think listeners can feel the difference between someone teaching from a distance and someone speaking from lived experience. Can you share how you got into this work and what has shaped your perspective more deeply over the years?
Thank you, Jen, first for having me. Hearing your introduction felt very familiar to me because so much of what you described mirrors what I've seen in families and what I've lived myself. I began this work as an educator. I spent more than 2 decades in special education, working closely with students who were bright, who were capable, full of potential, but still struggling. They were struggling to stay organized, to start tasks or follow through consistently. So, what shaped my perspective most deeply in these early years was noticing something that didn't make sense at first, because these were not students that lacked intelligence. Many understood perfectly what they had to do, the material, but they struggled within the process to manage time, to stay focused, and to be able to understand time management. Procrastination was a big issue. But I saw again and again was the emotional toll that took on the students and on the parents as well. So many parents carried quite guilt, wondering if they were doing something wrong, wondering if their child just needed more discipline or more motivation. But my work became deeply personal when my own daughter was diagnosed with ADHD, because suddenly I wasn't just the educator observing from the outside. I was the mother sitting at the dining room table with the homework in front of her, feeling the tension rise, watching frustration build, and asking myself the same questions I heard from parents year after year. Was I expecting too much? Was I being too impatient? Was I missing something? That experience reshaped how I saw everything, not just as a professional, but as a parent. And that's when my work became truly meaningful and personal.
You actually studied special education and spent 23 years in that field before becoming a solopreneur. What made you want to go deeper and then go out on your own?
For me, going out on my own wasn't a sudden decision. It was something that grew slowly over time. I loved my years in special education. I loved my classroom, my kids. I loved the families I worked with, and the work itself. But over the years, I began noticing a pattern that concerned me. Many students were learning academic content, but they were leaving school without the daily life skills that supported success. Not knowledge, but executive functioning skills. Things like planning, starting tasks, managing time, and follow through. And I kept thinking, we were helping students learn subjects, but many families were still struggling every evening at home. And that happened with me at home every single day. Homework time had become stressful, emotionally exhausting, not because children didn't care, but because structure was missing. And I was trying to do the same at home. I was trying to build structure with my daughter as well, but as a mother, it it was complicated. I felt it was difficult because the relationship was also struggling. That combination, my professional experience, my personal experience, made me want to go deeper. I wanted to build something focused specifically on the skills underneath success, the habits, the routines, and systems that allow learning to happen, not just in school, but at home as well. And yeah, eventually I realized that to do this work the way I believed it needed to be done, I had to step outside and transition to something online where I could go into the home and help the student and help the parent, um, in in their own space. So yeah, becoming a solopreneur was both exciting, frightening, but I think very purposeful.
I'm so glad you did. I've experienced the same thing and it's
Yeah.
life-changing, but also terrifying. Was there ever a moment when things just clicked, when your personal experience and your professional work finally felt like the same thing?
It did. I remember sitting beside my daughter one evening during homework. She had the assignment in front of her. She understood the material, but she just wasn't able to begin. She wasn't refusing. She wasn't distracted. She was just stuck. And I felt that familiar frustration I had seen in parents when I had these parents' conferences. I felt that same frustration that they were talking about in me. But instead of reacting, I decided to pause. And in that moment, something shifted. I realized that wasn't about my daughter's effort, that it wasn't about her intelligence, it wasn't about my parenting, it was about her not being able to start. She didn't know how to begin, and no one had ever taught her. That moment was the moment everything like clicked and connected for me. My professional knowledge and my personal experience became like one experience. I stopped being the theory, and I became a living understanding of what was going on. And from that moment forward, my work changed. It changed with my daughter. It changed with the kids I taught. It changed with the parents I had the conferences with. I began to focus on how to teach their kids the ability to start. And those are the executive functioning skills I work on today.
Thank you for sharing that because I think there's something so powerful about that, that moment when your personal story stops being separate from your work and starts being your work. And I know that feeling because it's happened to me too. Before we go deeper, I want to make sure our listeners have a shared language here because executive function is one of those terms that gets used a lot but can feel abstract or clinical until you really see it in someone's everyday life. What does executive function mean in the daily life of a teenager?
It simply means the skills that help us manage ourselves. For a teenager, executive function is what allows them to start the homework without feeling told 5 times. It is to estimate how long something will take, to remember assignments, to organize materials, to stay focused long enough to finish what they have begun. That's executive function skills. It's not about intelligence, it's about management. So when these skills are working well, a teen can move through their day with some independence. They know what needs to be done. They know what tasks they have to start. They don't resist to it. And if they find a task that is difficult, for example, they will recover more easily and continue with the task. When executive function skills are not fully developed, daily life becomes much harder. So, this is where you might see a teen sitting with homework open, but not being able to start, a backpack full of papers, but nothing organized, a student staying up late because they underestimated how long the work would take, a child who feels overwhelmed because there's so much to be done that he's just scared to begin working, not because they don't understand the material, it's just overwhelm. The overwhelm won't let them begin. And that's what many parents are seeing at home. Um, Not a knowledge problem, but a management problem. When parents see this, they, of course, also get frustrated because they're not being able to see their kid being able to finish homework on time. They're seeing a lot of missing assignments. So now the parent gets frustrated, and that frustration um, goes on to their son or to their daughter, which makes home a little bit difficult, the emotional part, especially.
Those were great examples of ways that executive function challenges can show up
Mm.
that a parent might not recognize, or they might misidentify or misinterpret. Can you tell if there's a difference between a teen who truly has a skill gap and one who's just choosing not to try?
The child that has a skill gap, it's the child that has difficulty planning, organizing. You can see that they're really trying, but they're stuck. The other type of child is not putting that amount of effort into the work, but this again can be because the child is overwhelmed. And that overwhelm will shut down their brain and will not give them the motivation to start the work.
I can see how it would be to a parent's advantage to have a professional come in and evaluate their child so they understand what's truly going on. And one of the things I love about the way that you frame these is that it immediately removes the blame from the equation. Because when we're talking about skill gaps, they're not character flaws. So the whole conversation has to change around that. I want to get more personal for a moment because I think it matters. When my oldest daughter was diagnosed with autism and ADHD, it started a chain reaction in our family that I wasn't expecting. As her mom, I wanted to support her in any way I could, so I began deep diving down rabbit holes of resources to learn about these conditions. We began to look more closely at everyone else in the family, and what we found was ADHD across the board. My kids, my husband, and eventually me. I remembered this strange combination of grief and relief. Like, oh, this was never just me not trying hard enough. For other mothers listening who are in that moment of recognition where they see themselves in their struggling teen, what does that experience do to a person and what becomes possible once they're on the other side of it?
That moment can be very emotional, Jen. Many parents come to me thinking they are helping their child. And then as they learn more about executive function, they begin to recognize pieces of themselves in what we're describing. They might think back on their own childhood, their own school years, and remember how hard certain things felt. Staying organized, finishing work on time, remembering assignments. And often they carry years of quiet self blame. They may have believed they were careless, scattered, or not disciplined enough. So when they begin to understand executive function, something in them shifts. There's a relief because they finally have language for struggles they couldn't explain before. But there can also be grief because they realize how long they lived without that understanding. So, what becomes possible on the other side of that is recognition and compassion, not just toward the child, but towards themselves. They begin to see that many struggles were not character flaws, they were skill gaps. And when that understanding happens, the tone inside the home, it begins to change. There's less blame, there's more patience, more curiosity. And that shift alone can transform how families interact.
You just explained exactly the experience that I had with my daughters, way better than I could have. I think that so many midlife women are carrying silent shame around the things they've blamed themselves for decades, whether that's not being organized enough, not following through, or not living up to their own potential. Finally, having a name for it can be both a relief and a grief at the same time, like you said. Let's talk more about the parent side of this because your program isn't just for teens. It includes 4 dedicated sessions just for parents, and you actively ask parents not to ask their teen about homework during this program. Why does that matter so much, and what does shifting that role do for their relationship?
Well, this matters because homework has become one of the most emotionally charged moments inside homes. By the time families come to me, parents have usually tried everything: reminders, asking repeatedly if work is done. And those reminders, although well intentioned, often are turned into tension. Homework becomes a battleground instead of a learning moment. When I ask parents to step back from asking about homework, it's not because they don't care. It's because we are trying to protect their relationship. That's one of the most important things in my program. When parents step out of the role of constant reminder, something important happens at home. The parent child relationship begins to shift back toward connection. Before, it's always about homework, what tasks they have, what projects. And when I ask them to step back, parents are no longer the enforcers. They become the supporters again. And it's not that I become the enforcer when they work with me. I am teaching the skills for the executive function skills. But when there's a parent child relationship, it becomes a little bit harder. I take the responsibility for the structure, for the planning, the systems, the accountability, so the parent doesn't have to carry the emotional weight on their own. It's not that they're not going to be alongside their child, but they don't have to teach these executive functioning skills um, that their child is lacking. I would be in charge of that. So the relationship improves a whole lot. And that shift reduces conflict and it also rebuilds trust between parents and children.
On the flip side of that, what happens in the family dynamic when mom becomes the reminder system, the alarm clock, and the homework enforcer? What does that look like?
Well, when parents become the reminder system, the relationship slowly changes, often without realizing it. Instead of being the safe place their child turns to, they become associated with pressure. Every intersection begins to feel like a correction. The child starts listening and hearing things like, "Did you finish? Did you start? Did you turn it in?" And over time, children begin to anticipate those questions, and tension just rises even before words are even spoken. I have a lot of children that say, "I can't leave my room because I know that the first thing I'm going to hear is my parent asking me about homework, about the project." And so they're exhausted. And I know also parents become exhausted. And not because they don't love their child, but because they feel responsible for holding everything together. Many parents describe feeling like they are carrying their child's responsibilities on their own shoulders, especially for mothers and fathers who are already managing work, home responsibilities, and daily life. And it's also important for parents to understand that their children's responsibilities are for their children. It's not parents' responsibilities. It's our responsibility as a parent to teach our children about responsibilities, but we are not supposed to carry their responsibility.
How do you help parents step back without feeling like they're abandoning?
Gradually, but intentionally. The first thing I tell parents is that stepping back doesn't mean walking away. It means allowing your child to practice responsibility, just what we were saying before. But it's practicing responsibility with structure. Inside my program, I provide this structure. I teach students how to plan their week, how to organize their assignments, how to estimate time, and how to begin tasks. Parents, they remain informed every step of the way because I have a living document, and this is one of the tools that helps tremendously because here I record everything that has been worked in class and every skill that has been taught, every progress made, and every step that will be done in the future. And parents can review this anytime. So instead of asking their children repeatedly, "What did you do today?" or "Did you finish your homework?" or your task, they can simply check that document. And that gives transparency, that gives parents confidence, and they feel informed without needing to intervene. And that makes stepping back feel safe, not risky. And it also gives the opportunity to start other type of conversations with their child, not about homework, but about something else.
As a parent, that kind of communication and transparency sounds amazing. I also love the idea of supporting without over functioning because that's something that I come back to a lot in my own work. I think so many women in midlife have become the person who holds everything together for everyone, and but they've completely lost that thread back to themselves in the process. Another thing that I love is that you call your sessions class rather than coaching or therapy. Tell me more about that choice and what it communicates.
I chose the word class very intentionally. Many of the teens who arrive to me already feel different. Some feel behind, some feel tired of being corrected or reminded. Some come with low self esteem. So when they hear the word therapy, I don't know, they may feel that something is wrong with them. When they hear the word coaching, they may feel that there's some pressure to perform. But when they hear class, something shifts. Class is something familiar for them. Class means learning, it means improvement, not perfection. So it tells them immediately you are here to learn skills, not because you are broken. It's just because you are growing. You're growing into something new. And that word alone lowers resistance and it allows them to walk into a safe space, feeling capable and not judged. That's what I like them to feel, that I'm not here to judge them. I'm here to teach them skills.
I can see how language would really matter when you're working with teens who may already feel shame or resistance around getting help. And I love that you want your students to feel
Yeah.
like capable in that space with you. How do you build trust with a teen who may have had a lot of experience feeling like they're the problem?
Trust begins with consistency. Many teens arrive expecting correction as they've always received at home, um, in class. They assume adults will point out what they did wrong. So the first thing I do is create predictability. I always use the same structure, the same expectations, the same calm voice. I don't rush them. I don't overwhelm them. I guide them step by step. And I praise every single effort. This is something I also ask parents to do. So I ask parents to do two things, not to talk about homework anymore and to praise effort. And this is what I do in sessions every single time I see something that they have done well, something that they have improved. And one small phrase I often use is a very, very simple one. And I use it as a teacher, I use it as a coach, I use it as a mother. I just say, good job. Even when they haven't even begun the task, because I know that beginning is hard and acknowledging effort, it will build momentum. So I tell them what to do, and immediately I say, good job. And over time, I have noticed something different in my students and in my daughters, that they feel this motivation to start when I say good job. So this is a small recommendation for parents out there. Try it. Ask your son or daughter to do something and say good job immediately. And I think you will see a difference. I have seen the difference. Um, I don't know. They just notice that they are more motivated. Slowly, they start trusting themselves more. It will not be in a single day, but through repetition. So don't do it once. Do it as many times as you can. And yeah, so through motivation, through structure, through patience, and once trust is built, learning will accelerate because students are no longer protecting themselves. They are participating with me.
All of this is really important because that piece, that feeling like they're the problem, is something that doesn't necessarily disappear when those teens grow up. So many of the women in my audience carry that belief with them into adulthood, that they just need to try harder, be better, figure it out. And for so long, they don't know that there's another explanation. Now, you've talked about resilience as a real part of your work. that idea that challenges can be a blessing, that they shape who we become. How do you hold that with honesty, especially for families that are genuinely exhausted and maybe not yet at the place where they can receive that framing?
I hold that with a lot of compassion because I never assume families are ready to see challenges as growth right away. When families first arrive, they are often tired. They are often most emotionally tired, mentally as well, but emotionally tired is a big one. They have been trying to solve the same problems over and over again, often without seeing progress. So they try one day, they see a little bit of progress, and maybe the next day they feel that they've they've gone behind a couple of steps. So I don't begin with growth language. I begin with understanding. I listen carefully. I acknowledge how hard things have been because before growth can happen, families need to feel seen. They need to feel understood. So only after that trust develops do we begin talking about resilience, not as something that is forced, but as something that will develop slowly over time. Resilience is not pretending things will be easy. Resilience is continuing, even when things are difficult. And that's when I also congratulate parents and tell them that they have done a great job trying to look for help because that's resilience. That's not stopping. That's not giving up.
Love how you're meeting families where they are before you expect them, or invite them to look at it from a different perspective. What has your own experience taught you about resilience that you couldn't have learned any other way?
Resilience in my life began very early. As a child, I experienced changes that required adaptation. I changed countries several times. I had to learn new languages. I had to adjust to different environments. Then I learned to live with my parents apart. They got divorced, which required emotional strength at a young age. I was 10 years old when this happened. Then later, when I was about 20 years old, I learned that I needed a kidney transplant. That was a big one. So it took an important meaning. It was something that moved forward with me little by little. I knew I had to take care of myself consistently. I knew that I had to wait for a transplant. I had that for around 10 years. It shaped me as a person, as learning to wait, learning to organize myself. I received my brother's kidney when I was 30 years old, so I waited for those 10 years, and my angel donated his kidney. So, yeah, that moment changed my life, definitely. It reminded me how fragile life can be and how precious it is. So, resilience continued to grow through my experience and then raising my daughter with ADHD and learning how to support her without losing that connection, because I believe that at the beginning I was losing connection with her and it was hard for me to have a positive relationship with her, understanding that I needed to shift the way I was handling things. Also influenced in my resilience. After living for 10 years in Houston, 5 years in Colombia, 30 years in Peru, and now 5 years in Seattle, building a new life, a new community. I went through a divorce, got married again, have another beautiful daughter. I am very intentional about enjoying life, about fulfilling my responsibilities first, yes, but also making time to appreciate the moments my family and I have together. And all of these experiences shaped my understanding of resilience, coming back to your question. Not as strength alone, but as persistence, and not as perfection, but as continuation. So, yeah, if I could describe it in one word, I think it would be persistence, and a couple of words, persistence and continuation.
Thank you for sharing all of that and that vulnerability, because I think that's one of the things that makes your work feel different. It's not just technique and structure. There's a real thread of humanity and your lived experience running through it. For the mom listening who recognizes something in this conversation, maybe her teen is struggling, maybe she suspects she might be struggling too. Maybe she's just starting to wonder if some of her lifelong patterns have a name. What do you want her to hear first?
What I want her to hear first is that she's not failing and that their child isn't failing either. There are many families that come to me feeling discouraged because they've tried so many things. They've tried the reminders, the consequences, the encouragement. For them, nothing sticks. What they often see and what they often feel is that failure. And I see that exhaustion in them. I see parents wanting to be their best, but I see that they don't have the right tools. And I see children trying, but they don't have the right skills. So the first message I want parents to hear is that don't blame themselves. It's not about blame, it's about understanding. And once understanding begins, change will become possible. Not instantly, but steadily. It will.
How does a parent know when it's time to bring in outside support? And what have you seen gets in the way of them asking for help sometimes?
So parents usually consider outside support when they notice the same struggles repeating, week after week, month after month, without meaningful improvement. Not occasional changes, but consistent ones. Homework taking hours, arguments becoming a routine, stress becoming normal. And what often gets in the way of asking for help is guilt. Parents wonder, shouldn't I be able to fix this myself? Or maybe this will pass. But support is not a sign of failure. Support is a sign of awareness. Just like we seek help for reading difficulties, for medical concerns, learning support is sometimes necessary for skill development. And when parents understand that, asking for help becomes easier.
Now, when a parent does ask for help and they're getting the help, what does it look like? How do they know when it's working?
When support is working, the first changes are often small, but they are meaningful. You might see a student begin homework without being told, or you might see your child using a planner or a calendar consistently, or complete tasks with fewer reminders. All those small changes matter. At home, evenings will begin feeling calmer. Parents will ask fewer questions. Number one, because they can read in the living document. Number two, because I have asked them to. Number three, because their child is being taught how to use the skills properly. Students are also showing more confidence. And at home, they can see that the tension has also decreased. Another important sign is an emotional sign. You will see your child feeling less defeated, feeling more confident, and parents will also feel less overwhelmed. So gradually, the homes will feel more cooperative than confrontational.
That all sounds like a dream come true. And for a parent in the thick of all of this, I'm sure they would agree that maybe it's time to reach out and get some support or get some coaching. But speaking of resources for parents, there is one thing I want to mention here because this conversation has made me want to point people to this. I do have a free executive function self assessment for adults that I'm going to put in the show notes for everyone. It's not a diagnosis, it's just a starting point. It's like a way to start naming what you've been living with. I'm also working on converting it into just a quiz format so it's even easier to access. So, if anything in today's conversation made you as a listener wonder about your own brain, there's a gentle first step for you. And then for the woman listening who sees herself in all of this, the one who maybe spent decades pushing through, overriding her own needs, and then building her whole life around coping strategies that she didn't even know were coping strategies, what do you want her to know about it not being too late to understand herself differently?
Well, many adults grew up, including me, without the language for executive function. We were told to try harder, to be more organized, to pay more attention, but we were never shown how. At least I wasn't. So they created coping strategies, sometimes very successful ones, just to keep up. I had a father that was the only thing I heard all the time at home. And I think also my father maybe had some difficulty organizing when he was a kid. I don't know, but he was so structured when he was a father. And he passed this on to me, but with all these questions. Did you do your homework? Are you organized? Are you ready for tomorrow? And yeah, I guess over time, these strategies became habits. Some worked well, others created a lot of stress. But when adults finally recognize these patterns, it can feel emotional. But recognition, we have to understand, is not failure. Recognition is information, and information will create opportunity, opportunity to understand, opportunity to adjust, and opportunity to grow intentionally.
As a woman who didn't have the language for executive function for the longest time, I can definitely speak to how that changed me. Finally having it, I knew what I could search for, like on the internet, what resources I should be looking for when you have the right language. So it definitely was beneficial to me. What do you hope families take forward after they're done working with you? Not just the teens, but the parents too.
What I hope families take forward today is confidence. Not confidence that everything will always go perfectly, but confidence that they now have the tools that work. For teens, that confidence comes from learning how to manage their responsibilities, how to begin tasks, how to stay organized, how to recover when things don't go as planned. And that's called resilience. For parents, confidence comes from seeing their child grow. But what I want them to understand, it's that it's important for them to help them grow without that pressure and to help them grow with structure because that also affects their self-esteem. And that's where that small phrase I was talking about before comes in handy, the good job. Emotionally, I hope families carry forward patience and perspective. Progress does not happen overnight. Skills take repetition, understanding takes time, and relationships strengthen when communication becomes calmer. I also want to tell families that homework will pass, assignments will pass, grades will pass. But what you really want to nourish and take care of is the relationship you have with your son or with your daughter.
Carla, you've given us so much to unpack here and to reflect on, and you've already been so generous with your time. But before we wrap up, I always love to leave listeners with one final anchor point. And there's one question I always ask my guests. If someone listening today takes away only one message from this conversation, what do you hope that is?
If someone listening today takes away only one message, I hope it's this: small moments matter more than we realize. So, to the parents listening, to the mothers, to the fathers, I know how much you carry. Parenthood is not easy. You work hard, you provide, you guide, you worry. And many days it feels like there is never enough time or energy to do everything perfectly. But perfection is not what your children need. Your children, they need steadiness. They need presence. They need your encouragement. And to the kids who may be listening, I want you to know that you are capable of learning even when things feel difficult. Not everything needs to change at once. Progress can happen step by step. Yeah, I just wish that parents have a deeply understanding of the relationship that they are building with their child. And that each moment that you interact with your child, each second, it makes a difference. So if you have to breathe, if you have to leave the room, if you have to tell yourself it's good, or tell your daughter or son, good job, before snapping, before losing it, my biggest advice is to do it. Everything that you do, that you talk, that you respond to your child will stay with him or with her for the rest of their lives.
Well, thank you so much for those messages. And thank you for being here and bringing this much care and honesty to this conversation. What I love about the work that you do is that it doesn't just help teens build skills, it helps whole families understand each other and themselves more compassionately. And I believe that ripple effect does go further than we can even see. For everyone listening, if any part of today's conversation made you stop and think, I wonder if that's what's happening in our house, or if you found yourself quiet recognizing your own experience inside the stories that we shared, I hope that recognition feels like an opening, not a verdict. You are not failing as a parent, your teen is not failing as a person, and it's not too late to get the right kind of support. There are a few things I'd love for you to have. First of all, Carla's information is going to be in the show notes, so you can reach out to her and learn more about her program for teens 12 and up. Parents are a part of the process too, which I really love. I also have a few resources that I'm making available for anyone who this episode resonated with. First, my free executive function self assessment for adults. That's a starting place for women who are beginning to wonder about their own brain. And if you want to go deeper, I'm currently writing a book called Executive Function Unlocked with a course to accompany it. I'll share more information about that as it comes together, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss that. And I'll link a wait list you can join so you hear about it first. You can follow both Carla and me on social media. Links are going to be in the show notes. And you can always reach me directly at info@reinventionwithjenfast.com. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, I'd love to hear from you. If today's episode meant something to you, please subscribe, share it with a friend who needs to hear these messages, and consider leaving a 5-star review. That really does help more women find the show. And if today stirred something up in you, some quiet recognition, some grief, some hope, let that be okay. That's where things begin. Thanks for being here. I'll see you the next time on The Comeback Show.